The Ministerial Conference of the World Trade Organization is currently taking place in Geneva. A key focus has been the proposal for the TRIPS waiver on COVID-19 related products. This would substantially lower costs for vaccines and other medical products needed for dealing with the disease. However, rich countries have been blocking and seeking to dilute this proposal from day one. Irrespective of what happens at the conference, it is clear that we will not get the best possible deal. Immunologist Dr. Satyajit Rath talks about the waiver proposal and what has stopped it so far.
In COVID-19 pandemic-related news, it has been reported recently that the TRIPS waiver proposal is being negotiated at the World Trade Organization. Some sort of a draft or the text of a draft has moved forward. And it's interesting to look at both what there is in the draft and what the circumstances of the draft are in terms of global public health policy. So in the first place, we must remember that this draft has been under discussion at the WTO for the past 2 years. This is unforgivable because the pandemic has been raging for the past 2 years. Millions of people have died. The vaccination campaigns across the world have been going on for close to a year now. It's astonishing that even now, all that is being arrived at the WTO negotiations at the ministerial is some sort of a tentative draft for the agreement. And this is the point that I think is the most crucial one for public health activism across the world to keep in mind. That what this involves and what this looks like is simply a matter of delaying any relaxation of the stringent draconian intellectual property right regimes and measures, even in the face of a raging pandemic. This is not surprising because clearly, right from the early days of the pandemic 2 years ago, both governments, philanthropic organizations like the Gates Foundation, and communities at large seem to have given in to the proposition that the global public health requirement for vaccines for COVID-19 and for antiviral drugs and any other related therapeutic interventions will be delivered not on a need-based structure, but by for-profit companies. So the overwhelming majority of vaccines were developed in public health funded institutions and in publicly funded institutions and laboratories across the world. And across the world, with the exceptions of China and Cuba, they have been further developed for industrial manufacture, distributed, and profited from by profit-making pharma sectors. Primarily big pharma. Secondly, the original suggestion that came from South Africa, India, and their supporting countries was for a very active intervention in favor of a very broad portfolio of vaccines and other possible technologies of relevance to COVID-19 for the pandemic. Implicit in that was the fact that technology transfer, active technology transfer will be done, not simply that compulsory licensing will be agreed upon. That appears in this new text that is circulating, that appears to have been walked back. What that seems to be doing is simply providing some rationale for walking back the intellectual property rights regime for vaccinations. There are two facts to be kept in mind here. One is that many public health activists will remember that under the Doha Agreement for the HIV pandemic that raged through the last years of the last century, the last 2 decades of the last century, there was an agreement already about compulsory licensing in the face of such public health requirement. So it's not as if this present text goes beyond that. In fact, it seems to fall a little short of that. As far as countries like India are concerned, there is already a provision in Indian law for compulsory licensing under such requirements. It's not clear that the WTO does anything further. Over and above that, the present text imposes an interesting limitation, and that is, it claims that these relaxations in patent rights for compulsory licensing will be given only to countries that export less than 10% of their total manufacture to other countries. This means that major countries such as China, such as India, such as Brazil, are likely to be excluded from this regime and are therefore likely to need either technology development of their own or commercial licensing of existing technologies. India has clearly done some of that. But as a result, it is very clear that the present text is a deeply narrow-focused rearguard action by profit-making pharma. And that too at the end of 2 years of protracted negotiations, during which the European Union, of course, has been very much on the side of the profit-making pharma sector. The USA has vacillated back and forth on the matter. But the outcome seems to be that after this huge delay, after this steady refusal on the part of both the rich countries and profit-making big pharma to accommodate public health needs and requirements in inclusive fashion, countries like India, South Africa, and so on and so forth, one can say appear to have given up and appear to be settling for second best or third best under protracted pressure. This outcome in the face of a still ongoing pandemic is an object lesson for public health activists the world over to keep in mind in current and future struggles.